and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. We've got another just fantastic show for you today. Can't wait to start talking about these exciting subjects we have prepared.
Possibly the greatest show of all time, Robbie.
The greatest show of all time. Today, Tuesday, December...
We've decided.
Whatever it is.
December
17th.
We just decided it was that day.
Fantastic.
So let's start at the peak, Robbie. What is on your radar?
Well, CNN finds itself at the center of a journalism screw-up. Clarissa Ward, the network's much-celebrated international correspondent, was accused of inadvertently producing a fake story and has now admitted that she did, in fact, get it wrong. Last week, a video segment by Ward went viral. Ward was looking for Austin Tice, an American journalist who was kidnapped in Syria more than a decade ago and is feared to have been killed. In the video, Ward enters a Syrian prison hoping to find Tice and records the moment when a man who was ostensibly a prisoner of Bashar al-Assad's recently toppled regime was released from his confinement. Let's watch some of that.
He tells the fighter he's from the city of Homs and has been in the cell for 3 months.
Okay, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
He clutches my arm tightly with both hands.
Okay. Does anyone have any water? Water. My. Okay, it's water. It's water. Okay. Okay. Okay, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
We start to walk him outside. Thank God you are safe. Don't be afraid, the fighter says. You are free. This is the third prison they brought me to, he says. The third prison. After 3 months in a windowless cell, he can finally see the sky.
It was a moving moment, one that earned Ward much praise for her reporting and for documenting it. The segment positively took Jake Tapper's breath away.
Another just absolutely remarkable report. CNN's Clarissa Ward in Damascus doing vital journalism. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
But here's the problem. There are allegations that Ward was duped and that man was not maybe a prisoner at all, or at least not who he said he was. The Syrian fact-checking website Verify Psy reported that the individual in question had provided a fake name. They pointed out inconsistencies in his story, say that he appears far too clean-shaven for someone who has been imprisoned for months, and according to Verify Psy, his true identity is Salama Mohammed Salama, who worked for the Syrian Air Force under Mossad and engaged in theft and extortion. Verify Psy wonders if CNN deliberately fabricated the story. Now, a deliberate fabrication seemed unlikely to me, but the questions raised are, in fact, important ones, because something definitely was amiss here. The New York Post described Salama as a notorious torturer working on behalf of the Assad regime. The Gray Zone's Wyatt Reed excoriated Ward for becoming the unwitting media accomplice of a widely hated Assad official, and Hassan Akkad, a filmmaker and activist who was previously held as a prisoner in Syria by the Assad regime, also had doubts about the video. He wrote on X, "I think this is staged. CNN should investigate. Happy to be proven wrong." He said the cell looked unlived in, adding, "Individuals are never locked in communal cells. That never happens in detention centers. None of the clips surfaced of people being released showed a single person in a communal cell. I watched every single clip." CNN decided to investigate the matter. In a statement, the network said, "We reported the scene as it unfolded, including what the prisoner told us with clear attribution. We have subsequently been investigating his background, and we are aware that he may have given a false identity. We are continuing our reporting into this and the wider story." Now, later, the network admitted that the man in question had in fact given CNN a false identity. He was indeed a lieutenant who served Bashar al-Assad. So good on CNN for investigating and admitting wrongdoing. But this is, of course, yet another black eye for the mainstream media, and at a time when trust in mainstream media is at an all-time low, incidents like this certainly do not help.
They certainly don't.
No, they don't.
There's no question about that. And it brings me back to that old saying about stories that are too good to check or too good to verify. Because what appeared to be the case was this extremely dramatic story but I would argue one that should have raised question marks at the start. Like, this guy was the only person still locked in an otherwise liberated prison, and they just hadn't noticed him before. And then some of the other things that other outside organizations have noted about his appearance not really seeming congruous with the story that was being told. It seemed like an emotional moment there, and we saw Jake Tapper's reaction. It seems to have fallen apart. I was glad that you noted that it seems highly unlikely that this was an intentional fabrication, but it does seem a pretty dramatic shortfall in fact-checking.
Yeah, because it wasn't a live broadcast, right? They recorded it and then released it later. If it had been totally live, I think I would have let Clarissa Ward off the hook here entirely, because it's just happening in front of you. She's reacting to it. And I get that they're speaking a different language. She's relying on a translator. Maybe if you could judge how he's reacting, understanding intuitively the language, that would have raised red flags. But they did broadcast this later, so they had some time to do some of the checking that was done by people to verify that he has actually worked for Assad, is like this notoriously corrupt official, which kind of makes this a quasi-comical display. Oh, I've been freed from prison. You have liberated me. He's a good actor, I guess.
Hey, well, I mean, I think it's Verify I have a photo on their website of the same guy in all his Syrian military or Air Force garb during the waning days, as it turned out, of the Assad regime. I do think it's quite ironic as well that he claimed that one of the central parts of the original story was he was completely unaware that Assad had fallen. since he was an intelligence officer for the Assad government,
he probably knew. He probably knew. It does go to the point, and I've brought this up before. People do, pounce on journalists when they get stuff wrong, including me. I'm very critical of, we do a lot of media criticism on the show. But it is the case in any field that if you work hard to trick someone, if you engage in elaborate deception, you will succeed a lot of the time, because we're trusting beings. And we have to fight in the role of journalism, we have to fight that trusting nature to doubly verify and triply verify and say, does this sound too good to be true? Is this exactly what I wanted to hear? Because people will tell you what you want to hear. This is why police succeed in interrogations all the time. They get people to admit to things that are untrue
that they didn't
because the human soul screams out for confession, wants to tell you what you want to hear.
Sure.
The friction is difficult and unpleasant.
And to that point about friction being unpleasant and about people wanting to know, wanting their own views confirmed, this is not, well, I guess it is a defense of Clarissa Ward in one respect. Some of the online criticism that I'm seeing is throwing in all these things that in many cases did not come from her, but are a complaint that people have about journalism or foreign reporting. And she is now getting blamed for lots and lots of things. Like, people were blaming her for the now disproven idea that, basically, that Hamas beheaded 40 babies. Hamas did horrific things, including killing children, but the 40 beheaded babies thing wasn't true. I can find no record that Clarissa Ward ever said that it was true, but now she's getting blamed for that. I see people suggesting that she faked a brief 48 hours in captivity in Darfur. I read her story on that. There's nothing that suggests that that was fake. She did center herself in the story, as she is, I think, somewhat prone to do in her reporting, and that can be a valid point of criticism. But it's just that sometimes the people who blast the media are just as susceptible to sort of confirmation bias as members of the media.
Well, that's true. I have seen criticisms of her along some Hamas-related line that I didn't look at closely enough. Maybe I'll follow up on that to see if I thought there was something worthy to criticize her there for.
Yeah, there was another thing that she was, I think, unfairly criticized for. She was taking cover from a bomb or missile attack, and then someone added a fake voiceover to suggest she was acting. Now, whether she was hamming it up a bit or not, that may be the case, but she wasn't under instruction.
It wasn't a full Brian Williams.
I like Brian Williams.
I know you do.
I do not wish to criticize Brian Williams on our air or anywhere else.
Fine. All right, we've got lots more to come today on Rising. Please stay tuned. More of the show right after this. Trump blasted the government during a Monday press conference at Mar-a-Lago for not being transparent about the drone situation. He said the military knows what's happening and where these aircraft come from, but for some reason wants to, quote, keep people in suspense.
The president-elect is even cancelling his trip to Bedminster, where observers have spotted these drones. Here he is.
Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. They're very close to Bedminster. I think maybe I won't spend the weekend in Bedminster. I've decided to cancel my trip.
Trump said he doesn't think the drones are being sent by our enemies. If they were, the government could have shot them down already.
FBI officials say the drones are not a threat to civilians and that they are manned aircraft. The White House says many of the drones are being lawfully operated. And
Trump also said, on a separate topic, that he would consider pardoning Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City. He feels Adams has been treated, quote, pretty unfairly. Adams is currently facing charges related to allegedly receiving foreign campaign contributions and related charges of bribery.
Would you consider pardoning Eric Adams?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think that he was treated pretty unfairly. Now, I haven't seen the gravity of it all, but it seems, you know, like being upgraded in an airplane many years ago. It's very interesting. When he essentially went against what was happening with the migrants coming in, and, you know, he made some pretty strong statements like, this is not sustainable. I said, you know what, he'll be indicted soon. And I said it, not as a prediction, a little bit lightheartedly, but I said it. I said, he's going to be indicted.
Trump did admit that he would have to look more into the facts of the Adams case before making a decision.
Trump is not done coming after other media outlets and after journalists after winning $15 million from ABC for a false statement that George Stephanopoulos made that Trump sued over. He says there is more work to be done.
Could you just come in on...
I want to expand on the defamation lawsuits. Could you see moving that to other people with individual platforms, social media influencers, people that...
Or newspapers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I do. I think you have to do it because they're very dishonest. We need a great media. We need a fair media.
Trump went on the warpath against legacy media. For example, he explained why he sued CBS News.
We're filing one on 60 Minutes, you know about that, where they took Kamala's answer, which was a crazy answer, a horrible answer, and they took the whole answer out and they replaced it with something else she said later on in the interview, which wasn't a great answer, but it wasn't like the first one. The first was grossly incompetent. It was weird.
Much to get to here. Let's actually knock out Eric Adams and then go back to the drones.
Sure.
I guess kudos to Eric Adams for successfully executing the media strategy of earning Republican sympathy by pretending that you were really against the immigrants coming in or whatever. He didn't do anything about it. He just complained about it. He
asked for more money.
He said all the rhetorically correct things and is now successfully able to position himself to claim he's some kind of victim of the deep state, just like our glorious president Donald Trump. I would be more hesitant to go that far. Certainly, I would like to see, you know, all the evidence made of corruption, but what has been alleged so far looks pretty conclusively corrupt to me, and I'm not sure why anyone in the conservative world needs to associate themselves with Eric Adams because he said some non-insane things about hordes of illegal immigrants coming to New York. This seems premature to me. But
I mean, I think
know?
The idea from Adams that he is the victim of some sort of politically motivated prosecution seems pretty absurd to me. It also seemed pretty absurd to me in Trump's cases, particularly the Mar-a-Lago and January the 6th ones. But in any event, Adams has made that argument, and it has plainly resonated with Trump because Trump loves people to seem to give heft to that broader argument about a politicized justice system. Eric Adams, as we always say, when anyone's accused of anything, is entitled in court to the presumption of innocence. We'll see how that goes, but the indictments contained quite a lot of pretty damning information.
And we gotta wait to see what he's even, you know, what the sentences are going to be recommended. Like it could, yes, he could get overcharged, or it could go well beyond what is actually shown in the evidence, and then I'll say so if I think that, but we need time for that.
Yeah.
All right, back to the drones. Donald Trump's penchant for just saying things that other people would be more circumspect about. is sometimes not just a political advantage for him, but a healthy thing for the American people on some fronts. He said what we are all thinking. He said what you and I said yesterday,
right,
which is that there's every reason to believe the government knows exactly what it is. It is a government program, and they should just put people at ease and say, that's what it is. It's a government program. Don't worry about it. And that's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I criticize Trump very frequently here, and I'll criticize some of the other remarks he made in a second on other topics. But on what he said about this, there's nothing wrong about what he said. In fact, it seems completely plausible that the case he is making is the correct one. And you and I were talking about the fact that if these were emanating from some foreign adversary, presumably we wouldn't be dilly-dallying around saying, oh, well, no big deal, we haven't quite figured it out yet. The whole casualness of the government response suggests government involvement in the underlying thing, in the drones themselves. And I think that's a pretty widespread belief. To your point, it hasn't been said that widely by elected officials, and now we have the president-elect of the United States Senate.
Good. Yeah, we had some elected officials, I can't remember who said it, that these were from an Iranian mothership,
that's right?
That's
yeah.
what it was last week?
And then the Department of Defense had to come out and say that's nonsense. Yeah,
yeah, I agree that that's nonsense.
Yeah. It was Jeff Van Drew, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken.
it's nonsense. And some of the things people are seeing, are just planes or just
right.
Venus or some of the heavenly bodies, celestial bodies, but also there is, and some are just people can make drones, can construct drones, fly them off. But the patterns of what we are seeing being just outside, illegal airspace, that kind of thing, really suggests a government program.
And you were making the point yesterday that I think you were quoting someone else from Reason magazine?
Ben Domenech from Fox and The Spectator, saying that exactly this proposal was they said they were going to do this. They're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. They being the Defense Department, the Pentagon.
So what a coincidence.
What a coincidence.
How could that happen?
But it does alarm people, in this era of greater concern about, the alien whistleblowers, that not a lot came of that, but much was alleged. Seeing things in the sky is just an era of heightened tension and paranoia. The government should not, be spying on paranoid schizophrenics, making them think that we're all going crazy.
Or fueling those sorts of concerns, right? We were talking in a different context today about lack of trust in institutions. The media is certainly one of those institutions, but government writ large, not even necessarily the Biden administration or the incoming Trump administration, but government being distrusted. There's no need to play into that by giving what seem rather implausible explanations.
Did you watch The Three-Body Problem? On Netflix.
I did not.
One. It's based on a great science fiction book series. It was on Netflix. It was pretty good. There's aliens and they're coming. They're hundreds of years away, and but their technology has arrived first, and they put they turn the sky into a message of submission to us, and it freaks everybody out.
Okay.
That's just what I've been on.
I was probably watching 60 Minutes to defend it from the absurd threat of legal action by the President-elect of the United States, who seems to be annoyed because an interview wasn't to his liking. I mean,
we're going to talk about that more in a minute. 60 Minutes is frequently on my nerves, though. I will say that. Frequently on my last nerve.
I'm actually not a frequent watcher, but the opportunity to claim I was too good for me.
More Rising right after this. Stay tuned. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs have begun having their desired effect on other nations, including some of our ostensible allies. Donald Trump said they are necessary to punish China, Mexico, and Canada for aiding criminal gangs. He said tariffs would remain in place until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Our neighbor to the north is reeling. In a recent blow, Trudeau's longtime ally and finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned. The resignation comes as Freeland, who chaired a cabinet committee on U.S. relations, was set to deliver the fall economic statement and likely announce border security measures designed to help Canada avoid Trump's tariffs. President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to oppose a 25% tax on all products entering the U.S. from Canada and from Mexico. In her letter of resignation, Freeland said Canadians know when we are working for them, and they equally know when we are focused on ourselves. She added that Mr. Trudeau is engaging in costly political gimmicks.
Late Monday, Trump reacted on Truth Social. He wrote, "The great state of Canada is stunned as the finance minister resigns or was fired from her position by Governor Justin Trudeau. Her behaviour was totally toxic and not at all conducive to making deals which are good for the very unhappy citizens of Canada. She will not be missed." To replace Freeland, Trudeau swiftly named longtime ally and close friend Dominic LeBlanc. On Monday, another senior cabinet member within Mr Trudeau's party, Sean Fraser, announced he would resign as housing minister. So it looks like the Canadian Prime Minister's lieutenants are abandoning him.
Prime Minister Trudeau did make a trip to Mar-a-Lago last month in a sort of preemptive strike. Trudeau assured Trump of a border crackdown, but Canadian law enforcement officials acknowledged they are limited in what they can do to stop southbound migrants. Now, with all this turmoil, can Trudeau himself survive? Will his reign as Prime Minister come to some end, and will Mexico and China similarly be impacted? That is the question. I saw a great deal of speculation yesterday on social media, largely from anti-Trudeau conservative news sources, that he was in jeopardy. Do you know what the situation might be, Niall, being more connected to the politics of our northern neighbours than I am?
Global correspondent, because I have an accent. No.
Yes, indeed.
So Trudeau's approval ratings are very, very low. When he first came to power years ago, they were in the mid-60s. Now, in one survey in June, they were around 28%. So he's in pretty serious trouble. Now, the thing in relation to Chrystia Freeland that is important is she seems to have wanted a more confrontational approach to Trump. There are other domestic things I'll come to in a second, but she wanted a more aggressive pushback at what she considers America First economic nationalism. Trudeau seems not inclined to do that, and as you mentioned during your part of the read there, Trudeau made that sort of homage to Mar-a-Lago to try to get on Trump's good side. I'm not sure that there was anything really in concrete terms expected from it, but it was intended to create, good vibes. Chrystia Freeland doesn't seem to think that is the way forward. She, in addition, not to get in too deep into the domestic economics of Canada, she basically thinks that Trudeau is doing stuff, giving money away to try to buoy up his approval ratings. And she, as a Liberal, but as someone who doesn't want sort of spendthrift ways, seems to have an issue with that.
Trudeau has been in power for a long time.
9 years.
Some of this is just the inevitable eventual decline in popularity that leaders in parliamentary systems seem to eventually suffer.
Right.
Although in some ways parliamentary systems have been more stable than our own system, which has tossed out presidents now in rapid succession. So I don't think it's surprising Trudeau has come to this. I mean, I would argue that it's probably a good thing or even the best way forward maybe to have some kind of friendly relationship with Donald Trump and at least signal a desire to work with him on those fronts so that we end up not having these tariffs become a long-lasting part of our economic policy. We do not want tariffs to be a long-lasting economic part of our economic policy. They will be harmful for the countries they are placed on. They are harmful for consumers here. They inevitably result in prices rising. They should be, at best, a means to an end, a diplomatic tool, and but we don't want to see them become permanent.
Well, we don't generally want to see them become permanent. I think part of the debate, though, is what approach toward Trump is better to defang the threat of tariffs. For example, down in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum is adopting a more confrontational approach, in essence threatening retaliation if Trump goes ahead with this tariff plan. Now, that obviously is getting into a very much, butting heads with him. That tends to create an escalation, but Sheinbaum is obviously hoping that it ultimately dissuades him from the tariffs themselves. Trudeau is taking a very different approach, wanting, as we say, to sort of be on his good side, to kind of sweet talk him out of it. Carrot versus stick, Chrystia Freeland somewhere in the middle. Chrystia Freeland, incidentally, since we often talk about the media, was firstly a person of prominence as a journalist. She worked for the Financial Times and Reuters. I remember her being on cable news shows here quite regularly. So perhaps you have appointment as the Finance Minister of Canada in the future, Robby.
I don't think I would be very good at the job of Finance Minister of
for the
Canada,
Liberal Party,
being
anyway.
not an expert in finances or in Canada or a member of the Liberal Party, but maybe there's some comms role for me in some conservative government somewhere. I was going to say that, you know, for all Trump's, the way he is perceived as this uniquely combative figure, he does seem to make peace fairly easily when I mean, the opponent has to be open to that, has to make the pilgrimage, has to bow down. But then he seems pretty magnanimous. He seems to easily let things go. He's done this with Zuckerberg, with other political rivals like DeSantis and so on. I mean, everyone in the Republican Party is someone who at some point said something deeply, hysterically nasty about him, and he doesn't hold grudges if they admit they're wrong.
Well, if they admit they're wrong,
if they admit they're wrong and say they're sorry, then it's over.
Well, and kind of grovel to him. That's the
little bit of groveling.
That's the third. But I mean, Lindsey Graham, for example, would be your classic example of somebody who there was a lot of bitterness about back in 2016. But he has become such a sort of Trump acolyte, really, for the most part, that Trump naturally doesn't hold any grudges against that because he is one. And
I mean, think of the nasty things Elon and Trump said about each other for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Trump savaged Elon as desperate for electric car subsidies, that kind of thing. And now they're besties. Now Elon is the shadow president.
Yes, having spent, $100 million or so trying to get Trump elected. So that's part of it, for sure.
Well spent to have that level of influence from his perspective, probably.
Probably, but, you know.
People have joked, like, why did Trump even buy? I saw this tweet from someone. Elon's such an idiot. He bought Twitter and he reduced its value, and all he got in exchange was total control over our government.
No, I mean, I think it is an in-kind contribution in a way, is Elon's ownership of X, formerly Twitter.
More to come, still today on Rising. Please stay tuned. We'll be back in just a minute. A hotline just for major CEOs. That's what New York is considering following the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Per CNN, Governor Kathy Hochul's office is convening a safety summit between nervous business owners and law enforcement on Tuesday. The proposed hotline would offer a direct line to law enforcement if threats are perceived. Hochul will meet with 175 corporate representatives, plus Homeland Security and counterterrorism officials.
The unprecedented reaction comes despite no other documented attacks on CEOs, and of course the alleged shooter in the Thompson case, Luigi Mangione, has been arrested. So is Hochul's idea a bridge too far? Independent journalist Ken Klippenstein believes that it is. In a new Substack piece, Klippenstein argues that the meeting is a signal that officials are trying to elevate the killing of Thompson to an act of domestic terrorism. Here to elaborate is Ken Klippenstein himself. Welcome, Ken.
Hey guys, thanks for having me again.
So just to start off with this idea of the hotline itself, I was perplexed myself when I read about that because I thought, well, there already is a hotline for anyone who feels that their life is threatened. You can call 911. But this is a whole different CEO or corporate specific idea. So tell us what you make of it.
Yeah, it's almost like NYPD Plus or the Delta Sky Lounge of law enforcement for these corporate executives to call into. As you point out, the NYPD is not just a well-resourced law enforcement agency, it's the best resourced law enforcement agency in the country with a budget of over several $1 billion. And so the point to me is not that people don't have a channel for them to call into if they feel threatened. It's why these corporate executives should have their own special one, separate and apart from the rest of the public, especially in the absence of any articulate and specific credible threat to their livelihood, aside from the suspected shooter who, as you mentioned, has been apprehended. I think what's going on here is you're seeing a panic on the part of not just state officials in New York, but across the country. We just saw a mother of three in Florida arrested and charged with terrorism in relation to a threat that she made on a phone call with her health insurance company saying, you guys are next. Delay, deny, depose, the three words that are allegedly written on the bullet casings. Obviously not something you should say, and something for which she apologized. But I think the question here should be, is it necessary to elevate these things to the level of domestic terrorism, which brings with it an entire counterterror and national security apparatus above and beyond ordinary law enforcement resources and the law enforcement system that we have in place? So that's really the thing I think should be debated right now.
Yeah, certainly debated or just just squashed, just prevented from having domestic terrorism become more and more a part of the charges of routine criminal matters, or even just what ought to be protected speech being rounded up to that. In this the Luigi Mangione case, I haven't seen any evidence or heard anyone so far even say that there were like prior threats, and the inability of Brian Thompson to get a hold of law enforcement would have made some difference. That is not the case, right? He shot and killed him allegedly, presumably, without having given Brian Thompson any prior knowledge that he was after him. Are the CEOs actually the ones demanding this, saying we need some special line to law enforcement, or is this some weird, like, I don't know, ingratiating move by Hochul to be better liked by the business community? It's just such a weird thing to even be asking for. I have a hard time, I wonder whose idea it was.
I think it's bidirectional. You are seeing a panic on the part of Wall Street, and if you look at the financial coverage, I don't think that it's isolated to Hochul. But in the case of Hochul and government officials across the country, they see this as an opportunity to justify the massive expenditure in this security apparatus that we have. Which, by the way, there's no evidence succeeded at catching this guy. I mean, somebody found him at a McDonald's. Just some random guy saw him, thought maybe it was him, called police. That's what closed this case, not the huge amount of technical surveillance in the national security world. They call it ubiquitous technical surveillance because it really is everywhere. And over the course of the first several days since the murder of former CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, what we saw was a NYPD attempt to piece together with all of these different means, all these different cameras, all this surveillance they have at their disposal, and it utterly failed to catch this guy. It ended up just being an ordinary tipster in Pennsylvania who called in, mentioned before, in McDonald's, said, "Oh, I think this is him," and that's how they got him. But the authorities are using this as a case not just to say, "Hey, look at how great all this expensive and by the way, I think alarming the amount of technical surveillance that we have in this society is. Maybe we should expand this to counterterrorism." One of the biggest parts of the meeting that Hochul's having with all these CEOs that you mentioned at the top of the segment is the fact that counterterrorism is going to be the focus of the meeting, sharing counterterror intelligence with other intelligence agencies, not just within the NYPD, but across state lines and nationally. So, this is really, I think, viewed as a huge opportunity on the part of the national security state to try to expand its domain and its capabilities.
And talk a little bit more about that, Ken, in relation to what has happened since the killing of Brian Thompson, because it seems to me, in addition to the dangers that defining such acts as terrorism would bring in terms of, an apparatus and a kind of the business of policing expanding, it seems to me there's just on a fundamental free speech or dissenting speech basis, it's really tough to consider this terrorism. I mean, I'm not advocating for people going out and shooting health insurance executives or anybody else, but is that really terrorism? I mean, it would not meet my kind of rule of thumb definition of terrorism. It may have, in the broad sense, a political motive in the sense of a rage at the perceived inequities of the healthcare system and the health insurance system. But defining these kind of criticisms, like the woman in Florida who you mentioned, as criminal, is that dangerous in and of itself, in your view?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we have to separate from this the question of whether the suspected killer engaged in a terrorist act. I think it's pretty clear that there was a political dimension to this, judging from the manifesto, which I published, and in it is articulation of his grievances with the health insurance industry. We have to separate that from the assertion that this is somehow spreading. If you watch the news media, particularly cable news, where they have these former government officials, there has been a full court press to try to cast this as having a, quote, contagion effect. The idea that it's going to spread and there are going to be all these copycat killers. That was initially the reason that the press didn't release. That was one of the reasons cited for why the press didn't release the manifesto in the first place, is saying that this is going to inspire copycat killers. First of all, that's just media paternalism at its worst to say we're going to make the security determination here rather than the security officials and withhold this from you. For some reason, it's okay for the public to have the manifesto. It's for the news media to have the manifesto. It's too dangerous for the other part of the public, the audience, to be able to see it. But that's based on this presupposition that people are going to see this, and like some sort of trigger word in a Manchurian Candidate type movie that's going to just spur everyone to violence. And as we've seen with the public since the publication of the manifesto, that is not the case. It has not spurred other similar attacks. And so I think everyone needs to take a deep breath here and say, okay, there was one instance of this. Has there been any other serious attempt to do something like that? No, there hasn't. And absent that, I don't understand why we need to have this kind of, I think, panicked response that we're seeing, trying to treat this as though it's some kind of national trend in the absence of any evidence that that's the case.
Well, and it's also not as if suppressing the manifesto was somehow going to prevent idolizing of this. This figure is, I would argue, being idolized to some degree, ironically, by some people, but because he is attractive and has an attractive background, the media cannot stop people on social media from sharing pictures of him and discussing him. It's just, it's insane to think that, well, if we suppress his manifesto, we will contain a kind of contagion effect. If one is taking place, that's just like not going to happen. It's clear this person is inspiring some degree of public interest for beyond just the crime itself. But like you, I wonder. I mean, there is no definition, right, of what terrorism is. If terrorism is just committing a violent crime for a tangibly political associated reason, then yes, I guess it is terrorism, as is virtually all violent crimes that are not just you attacked your neighbor or something because you didn't like them, or your domestic violence, those wouldn't count. Workplace violence wouldn't count. But anything for any other discernible motive, which we should say is a low category of crime, right? Most violent crime is gang-related violence or domestic violence or workplace violence or something like that. The category of crime that is even plausibly political is very, very low. But it seems to be the one, to your point, that is obsessed over by media more than anything else.
Yeah, and we have laws in place that make it very difficult to charge domestic individuals with terrorism who are not acting on behalf of a foreign agent, because it's understood that the apparatus that's brought to bear on a designated terrorist is very powerful and is anathema to civil liberty. So for that reason, when you look at the State Department designations of terror groups, they're all foreign-based. And to the extent that we charge people operating on the U.S. with it, it's that they have some connection or link or tie to a foreign terrorist organization. So this is very serious stuff, and I don't think people realize the fire that they're playing with when these officials come out and say, as they have, as the deputy chief of the NYPD Intelligence, Rebecca Weiner, has said recently in a talk to the Atlantic Council think tank, describing this as terrorism. I don't think people realize how serious that is.
Ken Klippenstein, thanks once again for joining us. Always a good conversation, and more Rising coming up right after this.
Well, Democrats in the media are throwing a hissy fit over comments made by Steve Bannon during a speech at a New York Young Republicans Club gala on Sunday.
Bannon suggested that Trump could make another legal run for president in 2028, citing Trump world lawyer Mike Davis.
Donald John Trump is going to raise his hand on a King James Bible and take the oath of office. His third victory in his second term. And the Viceroy Mike Davis tells me, since it doesn't actually say consecutive, that, I don't know, maybe we do it again in 28.
The New Republic jumped into the conversation, writing, quote, "It's not even the first time this year that conservative figureheads have argued in favour of violating the Constitution to upgrade Trump's authoritarian power." The outlet cited an American conservative article from April that advocated for the repeal of the 22nd Amendment. That amendment, of course, prevents presidents from being elected more than twice. It came into existence after FDR was elected 4 times.
Senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, Michael Sozon, took to Twitter and wrote, quote, "As some of us have been saying, Trump will try to serve for a 3rd term, and the far-right Supreme Court could reinterpret the 22nd Amendment to allow it. They already reinterpreted the Constitution to turn presidents into kings above the law, right? The Young Turks host Cenk Uygur also jumped into the conversation, writing, MAGA keeps wondering why some of us think Trump might be dictatorial. When one of his top advisors says that he might run for a third term, people get worried. You can claim Steve Bannon was joking or that he doesn't represent Trump, but you can't claim those concerns came out of nowhere. This could all be one giant troll job, however, and likely is. Attorney and Article 3 Project founder Mike Davis, who Bannon referenced there in support of his argument, or I would say joke, that Trump will run again, says, Dear reporters, here's my response to the many of you reaching out to comment. Steve Bannon is obviously trolling. Only Obama gets a third term with his puppet, Joe Biden. Are you terrified that we will have yet another Donald Trump presidency, Niall? I am not.
Well, you're clearly not. I would have to pay credit to your intonations during that read, which I think indicated pretty clearly that you're not. I take it more seriously than you do. I think that Bannon, who I know and have known for quite a long time, is prone to saying things that are actually dangerous. I'm not at all sure, as you seem to be, that people hearing what he said there, including on the MAGA side, thought or think he is joking. I'm not at all persuaded that Trump himself would voluntarily go if there was an alternative to stay. I think he is very wedded to power. And I just think that this is one of those things where there is a pretty obvious double standard, where if in 2013, David Axelrod had come out and said, well, maybe we'll just do away with the 22nd Amendment and Obama can be elected to a third term. There would have been an explosion of rage.
I am sure I could find some Jonathan Chait-style columnist, and not to, Jonathan Chait I mostly like and agree with, but some very pro-Obama liberal person saying, wouldn't it be great if Obama could run for a third term? Shouldn't we get rid of the 22nd Amendment? If we got rid of the 22nd Amendment, yes, then Trump would run again. I fully believe that. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. But if it happened, then yes, he would run again.
But Bannon's argument, let's do me the favor of assuming that he's serious, or at least taking it seriously for 1 second. Bannon's argument, as I read it or heard it there, isn't we're going to do away with the 22nd Amendment. It's that it doesn't apply to non-consecutive terms.
Yeah, I have not heard anyone make that argument before. I guess I would have to reread exactly what it says and hear some legal opinions on it. But
we've heard the former chief strategist for Trump's 2016 campaign.
But just the assumption that the Supreme Court, that is a far-right Supreme Court that just rubber stamps every single thing, every mad Trump delusion is not the case.
That may not be the case, but it is certainly the case that the Supreme Court has, for example, greatly expanded presidential immunity in a way that is extremely helpful to Trump and would have been very vital for him had he not won election last time around, by broadening the scope of conduct.
Yeah, I mean, they broadened it not specifically for Trump, but for every person who occupies the executive branch, which is why I was not a big fan of that decision, although I see why they made it. I would rather sharply limit executive power rather than provide some kind of blank check, so I did not love that decision. Although, again, it's not specifically for Trump, it's for whoever ends up being president.
Yeah, but I mean, it is not specifically for Trump, but it was a decision made when he was on the brink of potentially becoming president again and was the former president who was facing criminal charges. Yeah, so it can't be completely attenuated.
The Supreme Court took the position that the ultimate check on the president engaging in an authoritarian way is at the ballot box, is the voters deciding. And even if he were to run for another term, because we got rid of that amendment, or if we got some kind of extremely favorable Supreme Court to it, Barack Obama then could run for another term, and they could fight it out. And there's all these concerns about the system being changed that seem sometimes. Can you conceive of how I would come to this?
I can, but
seem somewhat bad faith from a liberal or Democratic position, because they also talk about abolishing the Electoral College when they thought they can't possibly win because of the Electoral College. We should just have a popular vote. Now we hear less of that because Trump won the popular vote anyway. Or we need to do Senate. We need to do all sorts of massive structural change because we can't win. Boo-hoo. And then it goes out the window when they don't need those things anymore. It's not a philosophical or ideological position. And again, here, if we were to get rid of this amendment, which has only existed in the last 80 years of our political traditions. It was always the case prior to Harry Truman that the president could run for a third term. They just never did, except for FDR. And that's it's fine. I'm fine with term limits. In fact, I'm generally in favor of term limits. I would not be inclined to get rid of this, but the idea that it would just favor like Trump or Republicans, only them and forever, that's not true either. We could have Barack Obama again. So you could make the argument that Democrats would be in a much better, much stronger political position in this current moment if the 22nd Amendment had never existed.
Right.
And that they could run
Obama.
Probably
forever.
not Bill Clinton again, but
Right.
Obama.
Yeah. No, you could.
Successfully.
But look, here's the thing, Robbie. It is true, certainly, that Democratic politicians have made arguments and then changed those arguments when it has suited them on big topics. It is true that some of these criticisms are bad faith. And it is true that one can have an argument about the merits or demerits of term limits. But it seems to me just implausible to say Steve Bannon is having this academic or abstract discussion that is about the broad issue of term limits. I mean, Bannon would like Trump to be able to run again, and it seems to me is trying to put forth in a jocular but not necessarily fake or joking fashion the idea that the 22nd Amendment could be gotten around somehow.
Tell us what you think. Do you expect to see Trump just running for president every election cycle until he is no more? I guess that could be the case. More Rising right after this.
I'm doing this because I feel I have an obligation to. I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper, which had a very, very good pollster who got me right all the time. And then just before the election, she said I was going to lose by 3 or 4 points, and it became the biggest story all over the world.
That was President-elect Donald Trump speaking at a press conference on Monday where he made clear that he is going after the press. Here's a little bit more.
In my opinion, it was fraud and it was election interference. You know, she's gotten me right always. She's a very good pollster. She knows what she was doing. And she then quit before. And we'll probably be filing a major lawsuit against them today or tomorrow.
And so he did. Trump filed a suit late Monday against Iowa's Des Moines Register, renowned pollster Ann Selzer, and the paper's parent company, Gannett. He took legal action because the paper, based on Selzer's final polling before the election, suggested that Vice President Harris was ahead of Trump and slated to win the Hawkeye state. Of course, Trump won it overwhelmingly in the end. He is arguing violations of the Iowa Consumer Fraud Act, which bans deception when advertising or selling merchandise. Now, the suit comes on the heels of Trump winning a defamation suit against ABC and its anchor George Stephanopoulos, winning in the sense that ABC settled it. Media experts warn his actions could have a chilling effect on news and on political polling.
David Axelrod reacted on X, posting, quote, "Now Trump says he's suing the Des Moines Register because their poll understated his support, 60 Minutes because of their editing of the Kamala Harris interview, the Pulitzer Committee for honoring the New York Times. Welcome to Hungary, folks." And Richard Hanania wrote, quote, "Trump, I'm going to sue Ann Selzer for releasing a poll I didn't like. If you care about free speech and the abuse of government power, he is the worst man in politics. You are a blind idiot if you don't see this."
Not how you view it, I would imagine, Mr. Suave.
Well, I mean, I don't think everybody should sue everything for, you know, all those people were in fact wrong. Ann Selzer's poll was wildly inaccurate, gave false hope to the Kamala folks. She was wrong. She has now gone off into self-imposed exile because of how wrong she was. The Kamala Harris interview was, in my view, edited deceptively. I think they should not have done that. Now, do I think they should all be sued for being wrong? No, I don't think we sue people for being wrong. Donald Trump is the president. He should focus on delivering on the promises he made to the American people. One of those being a greater respect for free speech. That's something that many of his top advisors, Elon Musk, RFK Jr., care a lot about censorship on social media. Suing people for saying things wrong can be, I would argue, a form of censorship. It's not something I'm in favor of, and so I would advise him not to do that.
So I think there's a separate issue here from just suing people because they're wrong. I have, as you're well aware, defended the whole idea of defamation lawsuits, and the whole reason for why we have defamation statutes seems very valid to me. Now, here what we have is Trump suing a pollster alleging that constitutes election interference. Now, I doubt that he himself really believes that, to be perfectly honest. I think that it is obvious that pollsters have a vested interest in trying to be right, or as close to right as they can. That result from Ann Selzer was an outlier at the time. It did cause a big stir at the time because people did wonder, was she picking up on something that other pollsters were not picking up on? That was incorrect. The good people of Iowa came out and cast their ballots, and they cast them very heavily for Donald Trump. My problem here is twofold. One is I think that Trump is suing in a way that is intended to be intimidatory of the media. In other words, just to create the trouble of having to defend a suit, however ill-founded or vexatious it may appear to be. And then secondly, I think he is doing it basically for PR reasons, to fuel his argument that, oh well, the media is always corrupt and always against me. I think there are instances where Donald Trump is written about or talked about unfairly in the media, but I don't think a poll that proves to be completely wrong is one of them. I just think that it's a way to gain headlines, to bash the media, and there's no, I'm absolutely befuddled by what he thinks the legitimate legal argument even is.
Look, I'm inclined to agree with you, although I haven't taken a close look at this law, this Iowa consumer deception law that is about false advertising and those kinds of things. As a libertarian, I would probably say that I worry such laws create permissions exactly like this for political figures or government figures to go after false advertising, or what is false advertising versus opinionated advertising.
But it's also
the government
not,
should be deciding this, and
right. But it's also not really advertising at all. I mean, it's not like it's a part of the editorial product of the Des Moines Register in this case, who commissioned Ann Selzer to do polls, as they have done for many years. On occasions in the past, she has been right when others were wrong. Here, she was wrong when others were right. Very embarrassing for her, potentially career-ending. But the suggestion that there was nefariousness involved in it seems...
Right. Well, I don't think there was nefariousness because it's been embarrassing for her.
Exactly.
And if it was not going to be correct in the end, it was going to result in her getting all this opprobrium. But I guess if you had a poll saying, like, that 67% of people prefer some product or something, could you argue that that was advertising? And then we took a literal vote the next day on which product people preferred, and that was not the case. I would see why some people would argue that was false advertising.
I mean, I think that's a stretch, honestly. But I mean, I think that what is happening here is that Trump has got this settlement from ABC News. We talked about that yesterday. George Stephanopoulos was legally wrong in what he said.
And he said it over and over and over again. It wasn't one slip of the tongue
he said
where they put up a note next day saying, when we said this, we meant this.
Yeah.
They clung to it, that they could say it because it was in the ballpark of being correct as a colloquial term, even though they were discussing narrowly the legal ruling.
Yeah.
And that's what got them in trouble.
No, it was. And, obviously I think it is important that you don't do what Stephanopoulos did. I think it would have been oddly difficult for Trump to prevail if it had gone to trial because of the protections afforded to public figures, and because Stephanopoulos and ABC News could have made the argument that you're talking about, which is that there is a difference between how the New York penal law defines rape and how that term is often used in common usage. But the point is, it was wrong to say what he did. Trump then got this $15 million settlement. I think he generally feels the media is on the run because he won the election in the face of a lot of media coverage that is very critical of him. I would argue that much, though not all of the critical coverage, is completely merited for various things that he says. But he is trying to press the advantage against the media, and I think this is fun.
Stick around, more Rising right after this.
People are coming out of every corner to weigh in on the drone sightings in the Northeast. Even current Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg had something to say. Let's watch.
Donald Trump was on with Joe Rogan. They had a whole conversation about aliens, not the kind he wants to deport, actual extraterrestrials. Then Cliff High said 39 days after that interview, we were going to start having an alien invasion. Around December 3rd, that's when all of these SUV-sized drones, which I've even seen, started getting seen over Jersey? Is it an alien invasion?
I mean, no disrespect to New Jersey when I say that I think it's very unlikely that an alien invasion would begin.
Watch your mouth. We lived it.
I know, but
Dang.
but no.
Nobody wants to come to Jersey.
I love New Jersey. I'm just saying, I don't think that's the kind of main point of entry that an extraterrestrial, unless there's something we don't know
You don't
about.
think aliens want to tan and go to the Jersey Shore or something?
After watching a video that floated a theory about the unmanned devices searching for harmful substances, podcasting giant Joe Rogan posted this on X. This is the first video about these drones that has got me genuinely concerned. Here's some of that clip, which was also played yesterday on Rising.
The only reason why you would ever fly an aircraft, an unmanned aircraft at night, is if you're looking for something, whether it be a person or trying to smell gas. We also have special sensors that can detect radioactive material.
And Republican lawmaker Nancy Mace piled on, accusing the U.S. government of not being, quote, forthcoming about the mysterious drones. She has said aliens could explain what has been happening in New Jersey.
Oh, aliens. I think it's exciting enough to talk about the drones themselves, which are mysterious in and of themselves. It has become this topic of national fascination for, I think, understandable reasons, right? It is the combination of the unusualness of the event, the idea that the government isn't telling the truth about it, and people do have legitimate fears, like some of these drones have been over very sensitive sites and so forth. I think they were over one of Trump's residences at one point. There was also a naval facility they were over. So look, I get why people are concerned. I just am wary of us getting into the whole, well, it's the aliens coming to kill us all mode of thought.
I've said this before now, you're not allowed to be skeptical on this. I get to be the skeptic for once because I too do not think it is aliens. I think if there are alien spacecrafts or bodies of alien pilots that were recovered by the U.S. government, and you, I address the viewer directly right now, have knowledge of this, come forward and tell us where they are. I don't want to hear anything more from whistleblowers saying they know a guy who knows exactly where it is. I want to hear from that guy, and I don't want excuses that they won't let me talk to you. No. We will protect you. I will protect you. I will shield you with my own body.
Sit in the middle here.
Yeah, you can sit back here so that if somebody's going to be, sniper fire, I will die instead.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the whole problem with the UFO thing, right? It's always about, like, I know something which I'm not able to provide the evidence to back up. Yeah. And that's why there's such doubt about it. I do think that it does just the drone story does lend itself to all these esoteric explanations. Whenever, again, to get back to the point that we have previously discussed, it would be I don't really get, if it is a government program, why they don't just come out and say it is a classified government program. We can't tell you the details, it's sensitive, but they're ours. Yeah, now, maybe they aren't.
They're liars, because they never do that.
Yeah, but it's like, I don't really get where the harm would be, I suppose, if they are adamant that
there would not be harm. There would be a benefit because people would be less paranoid about it. That's clearly what's gone on, but our government feels no accountability and feels no need to casually inform the American public when they're doing things like this, when they're doing experimental technology. They don't want your scrutiny. They don't want to be subjected to democratic forces. What if the people had some kind of check to say, well, actually, we don't want you doing that. Yeah. We don't like you flying things over our houses. No, thank you. No. They don't even want to create a veto point, so they're not going to say, yeah, we're doing this.
Well, but in the process of taking that approach, it seems to me you raise the chances of somebody, going out to their backyard and taking a pot shot at one way or another, or trying to bring them down from the air.
Yeah, and then they'll charge that person with domestic terrorism.
Yeah, and if the drone lands on somebody's house, it could have very serious effects. Which is why I don't think people should be shooting down drones. But there's all sorts of problems with this.
Yeah, there is, and then there will be a lot of reporting by mainstream media calling people deluded or crazy or conspiratorial for wondering about these things.
Right.
We're already starting to see some of that. Even though in independent media there's a healthy skepticism of establishment narratives, and there's an interest in this topic from both sides, from your Joe Rogan type people who are now more associated explicitly with the right, and Charlamagne Tha God, who's pretty not associated with the Democratic Party necessarily, but certainly with progressives and with the left, both having this kind of like, are we allowed to ask what's going on here?
Yeah, because it seems so ridiculous otherwise. I think that's the problem. That it does seem, I think you used the word yesterday, gaslighting, where it does seem like there is a fairly obvious truth that we are being trying to got around, or is trying to be evaded in some way, or trying to be covered up. So I think that is not helpful. I also do wonder how long this whole thing is going to go on, because the longer it goes on, I think the sharper those questions become. It becomes more difficult for the government to say why they are not taking any action if they're going to contend that these are somehow, objects that they have no control over. And so the longer it goes on, the sharper those questions become, I would have thought.
Well, when Donald Trump takes office, we discussed earlier in the show his comments on this, saying he thinks it's some government thing that they're not telling you about. Once he's president, he could just tell us explicitly what it is.
He could, or he could say he'll tell us in 2 weeks, which tends to be his fallback option for things that he doesn't really want to say. But
I could tell you, but I can't tell you.
You can keep it as classified information.
We can. Well, he can. When he's president, he can declassify it with his magic declassification powers.
With his broad powers of declassification,
which I would like to see more of. I would like to see things declassified. I still want, I say this all the time, the viewers might get sick of hearing it, the COVID origins investigation. There was a mandate to declassify it. Congress passed it on a nearly unanimous bipartisan basis. President Biden signed it into law. We were supposed to get the exact intelligence that led the FBI and the Energy Department to conclude that COVID was more likely to have come from a lab. It's 2 agencies that made that determination. I suspect, now, you start to imagine what kind of smoking gun could be offered. One of those would be incontrovertible evidence that the scientists at the lab in Wuhan were sick with flu-like conditions, something that the Wall Street Journal has reported, Michael Schellenberger has reported on this program, have seen evidence indicating that the scientists at the lab were sick with flu-like conditions before the wet market outbreak. That would be pretty conclusive evidence to my mind. So if they have something like that, that would help. That would kind of put it away for us. Yeah. So I would like to see that information, and Congress and Biden indicated that they should do that. And what instead we got was a press release saying what we already know, which is, well, we think this. Not explaining why. No. I want declassification, actual declassification.
Well, and I think on that particular topic, separate from the broader debate about COVID and vaccines and all of that, on the specific issue of the lab leak, to the point that you were mentioning earlier in the drones, I think there is now quite a lot of not even bipartisan's the wrong word, just across the spectrum, curiosity about what exactly happened there because of some of the reporting that has come out from very reputable organizations about that would seem to be supportive of the lab leak.
And I just want to know for sure. It's only like one of the most consequential things to happen in the last 100 years. Yeah. No. We would like to know.
Yeah. Seems like there is a public interest in that one, for sure.
Indeed. Stick around, more Rising right after this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been outspoken about what he thinks on the subject of vaccines. This has bothered some senators. Now, in an effort to get his nomination to head HHS okayed, President-elect Donald Trump is telling reporters that RFK Jr. would be less radical than some worry. Trump does not want Kennedy to revoke access to any vaccines. Instead, Kennedy will be providing him with reports on vaccines and looking into rising autism rates. Let's watch.
What do you say to people who are worried that his views on vaccines will translate into policies that will make their kids less safe?
No, I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical. But there are problems. Again, you take a look at autism today versus 20, 25 years ago, it's like not even believable. So we're going to have reports. No, nothing's going to happen very quickly. I think you're going to find that Bobby he's a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational.
Trump also assured the media that he himself was a big believer in the polio vaccine and that we weren't going to lose it. He said that he is not a fan of mandates. And however, after a reporter asked him whether vaccines should be mandated in schools, let's take a look.
I don't like mandates. I'm not a big mandate person. So, I was against mandates. Mostly Democrat governors did the mandates, and they did a very poor thing. It was, in retrospect, they made a big mistake having to do with the education of children. They lost like a year, 2 years of their lives. The mandate was a bad thing. I was against the mandate.
So that seemed to be an effort by Donald Trump to reassure some people who would be concerned that RFK Jr. would try to de-authorize vaccines or something of that nature, that's not going to happen. I remember similarly RFK Jr. being interviewed. He's been interviewed on this program a number of times. He was interviewed by my colleagues at Reason Magazine who asked him about making vaccines or other pharmaceuticals more or less easily available, and he said he would not make the process easier or harder. He wouldn't change it in any way. So if it's really just going to be reports on potential links, because I do think we should keep something of an open mind about this technology. If it's just going to be reports on whatever trade-offs might exist or whatever negative side effects could exist for some people, I don't think that's a problem.
I think that for a start, the remarks from Trump are in a recognition, in an odd sort of way, that the vaccine topic is by far the most damaging or potentially damaging thing for Kennedy's nomination. Kennedy obviously has this range of views on health topics writ large. Some of those views have, I would say, very wide support regardless of political ideology. Criticisms of over-processed foods, for example. I mean, I think that's an extremely widely shared concern. The problem, I think, with Kennedy is the perception that he is, at the very least, an extreme skeptic of vaccines. And that has manifested itself way before COVID. And I was disappointed, though not particularly surprised, to see Trump traffic in that lie that autism rates are or have increased because of an increased use of vaccination. That has been widely debunked. The British study that first gave rise to that theory was ultimately withdrawn amid a whole ethical cloud. So I don't think that is advantageous at all to be talking in those terms. I also think that in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s case, he has been associated with instances, the most infamous being a situation in American Samoa, where a vaccine, there was a mistake made by nurses in the way they administered a particular vaccine, which caused 2 children to die. And then there was a whole anti-vaccine scare in the wake of that, which Kennedy, at the very least, helped oxygenate. And then, vaccination rates fell and a much larger number of people died. So that's why I consider him a dangerous figure, and I think Trump's remarks are aimed at defanging that danger politically.
Look, I am not an expert on this. I have read just as much of media articles asserting that it is utterly false to say there's a connection between vaccines and autism. I don't know enough to reject that conclusion, so fine, I agree with that.
But I mean, I don't know enough to know why electricity powers my radio when I plug it into the wall, but I understand that electricity exists. I mean, we can't just constantly say, well, you just keep an open mind because you're not an expert. You have to assume at some level that there is overwhelming evidence.
I am not disputing that there is, and I accept that there is, and I agree. I don't have any reason to think otherwise. But on this subject, I have to grapple with the fact that so much that was said specifically about the COVID vaccine by experts who said, oh, all these things, ended up being not correct, having to do with how well it would prevent the spread of illness itself. I got the COVID vaccine. I got multiple booster shots. I would do so again. I've gotten the flu booster as well because I would like to mitigate the severity of symptoms if it does that. And I'm not persuaded by the harms attributed to it. I do not think it is particularly dangerous whatsoever. I have not seen good evidence for that. But I also think the benefits of it were dramatically overstated in terms of selling the idea of forcing people to become vaccinated. People in their employment, in their workplaces, just done by the workplace or done by Biden at the level of you had to do it at the government. For schools, there were some mandates, all sold on a just totally false basis that this would be is not just for your health, but for preventing the spread of the infection. Didn't prevent the spread. Maybe now there's some protective effect for some period of time, or if it's reducing your symptoms, maybe it's making you less contagious for some amount of time. But the idea that we could, like the polio vaccine, get everyone vaccinated and then stop the outbreak of this disease turned out to be untrue. And a policy was sold on that basis, even though so many expert people, including Dr. Fauci and Joe Biden himself, said it. So I have to contend with that.
But hold on a second. I mean, there is pretty emphatic evidence that being vaccinated against COVID significantly reduces your chances of dying or being hospitalized if you get it.
Yes, but that's a benefit.
But that is
not a public.
Well, no, because if you're hospitalized, then obviously you are putting a strain upon the hospital system, which was the whole danger in COVID, was the idea that the hospital system would collapse and people who had unrelated ailments would be unable to get medical treatment either. So you can't separate out the personal and the public to that extent in that regard.
I think that's a slippery slope. I don't think the mandate was sold on that basis, that we needed to because then you could sell any kind. I mean, maybe that's what's about to happen, including under RFK Jr. But you could then we're going to ban all sorts of unhealthy things because you being unhealthy makes my health care more expensive, and we can ban all sorts of sodas and cigarettes.
That's not the same.
We could all be having to jog in place all the time to keep our BMI down.
That is not the same as a pandemic that was overburdening ERs and intensive care.
The mandate was sold on the basis that you are a contagion risk to people around you.
Yes, the herd immunity.
Yeah, and that turned out that was all wrong. We're going to have COVID endemic forever because the protective aspect of the vaccine against the spread is not robust enough. Or can't keep up to date with new strains that develop and so on. We've now all had the experience. I've had COVID three times confirmed, 3 times, each time, within weeks of receiving a booster shot or the initial shot. I got the initial shot, I got COVID. You get a booster shot, you get COVID. This is an experience that millions and millions and millions of people have had at this point.
But I'm always perplexed when people raise, for example, the issue of vaccine mandates in schools. Vaccines have been mandated in schools for years for things like portfolio and measles and mumps and rubella.
Yeah, things that actually stop you from getting the disease.
There is no incursion of civil liberty in saying that people have to have a mandate, kids have to.
I mean, the idea that there's no debate over that is not. I would say that is not true. There are debates over whether those things should be included.
But so would you pull mandates for kids to be vaccinated?
I certainly know the people who would advocate that. Sure, for schools, yes. I mean, I would say the school should. If you want to go to the school, here's what the school's policies are.
Right.
And if the school, I would say that for a private workplace, I'm not putting rules on. It should be whoever controls the space gets to set what the rules are for the space. And if you want to have this kind of requirement, if you're a private school and you want to have a COVID mandate or have everyone mask for the rest of the time, you get to do that. I can think it's kind of silly, but I would just send my kids somewhere else. But that's how I would resolve it.
But my problem with that whole theory, which gets back to Mr. Bhattacharya and his ideas about how to cope with the COVID pandemic, is if you talk about private spaces and say, well, it's up to the owner of the space to determine it, it presumes wrongly that space is the only thing that matters. But in fact, in any private space, people come in and out of that space and have the risk of spreading disease or various other things when they do so. So you can't just quarantine it off as if one is just a private space and one's the public space.
Well, you say, sorry if you're afraid to enter this building, we don't mandate people to get, but if we're talking about the COVID vaccine, we all know, you wouldn't, even as an advocate, and again, I'm not against, I got it, I would get it again. I don't think the harms, the arguments people make that it's dangerous are accurate, but you wouldn't be afraid to walk into a space where there are unvaccinated people. It's a ludicrous idea now because it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, but the pandemic has faded for all sorts of reasons, including the mass
including that everybody got COVID.
Including the mass vaccination
95% of people plus.
Which eased the pressures on the healthcare system and which saved us from the worst.
I'm glad we did it. I support Operation Warp Speed. I hand it to Trump. Make the vaccines as available as possible. I am with Trump on this issue 100%. The vaccines were great. They saved the lives of a lot of particularly older Americans and overweight Americans, and we made them available as fast as possible. If it had been even faster, we could have saved even more lives, but that's great. And people arguing and making the case that you should get it, particularly if you're vulnerable, is great. And Trump did that too. And Trump said he got it, and that's all good. But that we didn't need to require it, and we didn't do mandates, and we're not getting a lot of added benefit from that. And so I'm with his attitude on it.
I think that there's a greater public good that is better served by the mandates.
All right. That does it for us today on Rising. We enjoy the robust disagreement and debate. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get podcasts. And we'll see you back here tomorrow.